Every night for 38 years, Walter Coyle climbed 112 iron steps to keep a promise to strangers he would never meet. He was the keeper of the Solitude Point Light, a narrow white tower standing watch over a rocky stretch of the Maine coastline where the fog rolled in thick as wool and the currents ran cold enough to kill a man in 20 minutes. The town below, Millbrook Harbor, was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and nobody asked what you earned. Which was fortunate for Walter because what he earned was not much. $11,000 a year when he started in 1971. Barely enough to keep the lights on in his own small keeper's cottage, let alone dream of anything more, but Walter had a habit that nobody in Millbrook Harbor knew about. Every single payday, before he bought groceries, before he paid the oil bill, before he did anything else at all, he walked to the merchant's bank on Cross Street and set aside $15. Not into a savings account, into shares of a broad market index fund that a traveling insurance salesman had mentioned to him once, almost in passing, over coffee at the diner. Just buy a little piece of everything, the salesman had said. Companies rise, companies fall, but the whole basket tends to grow. You won't get rich quick. You'll get rich slow. If you're patient. Just buy a little piece of everything, the salesman had said. Companies rise, companies fall, but the whole basket tends to grow. You won't get rich quick. You'll get rich slow, if you're patient. The salesman's name was Earl Pruitt, and he never came back to Millbrook Harbor after that autumn. Walter never bought a policy from him, never saw him again in his life. But he kept the man's business card pinned to the inside of his cottage door for 40 years, not because he needed the number, but because it reminded him of the exact moment his whole future had quietly changed course over a 5-cent cup of coffee. Dorothy used to joke that Earl Pruitt was the most important person Walter ever met for 15 minutes. Walter was nothing if not patient. Patience was, after all, the entire job description of a lighthouse keeper. You did not rush the fog, you did not argue with the tide, you simply showed up, night after night, and did the quiet, unglamorous work of keeping the light burning so that someone out there, someone you, there was a discipline to it that outsiders never understood. Every evening, rain or clear sky, Walter climbed the same 112 steps at the same hour, checked the same gauges, wound the same mechanisms, logged the same weather in the same careful hand. Storms came and went. Boats he'd never see passed safely in the dark because of work he'd never be thanked for. He liked it that way. There was something honest about a job whose entire purpose was to be reliable when nobody was watching. And Walter came to believe that money, real money, the kind that lasts, worked by the exact same quiet rule. Would never see and never thank, could find their way home. So he applied that same philosophy to his $15. He bought his little piece of everything, and then he forgot about it. He did not check it daily. There was no daily to check. This was long before phones lived in every pocket. He got a paper statement once a quarter, glanced at the number, and filed it in a metal box under his bed, next to his father's pocket watch and a photograph of his late wife, Dorothy, laughing on the pier the summer they met. The town watched Walter climb his steps every evening at dusk and assumed they knew his whole story. The quiet keeper, a little odd maybe, always alone up there with his logbooks and his charts. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation for a decade. He drove a truck with more rust than paint. When the other men at the harbor talked about boats they wanted to buy or vacations they were planning, Walter mostly listened and said very little and went home to his $15. In 1987, the stock market fell nearly a quarter of its value in a single day. Millbrook Harbor buzzed with the news. Down at the diner, men who had never owned a single share suddenly had strong opinions about Wall Street's collapse. Walter read the newspaper headline, folded it back up, and did something almost nobody else in the country was doing that week. He walked to the bank and bought more. Shares were on sale, as far as he was concerned, and a man does not run from a sale. He'd tell her, a young woman named Grace, who had only worked at Merchant's Bank for a year, asked him if he was certain. Everyone else coming through her line that week was pulling money out, not putting it in. Walter just shrugged and said the tide was low, and low tide was the best time to go looking for what the ocean leaves behind. Grace remembered that conversation for the rest of her career. She would tell the story to young loan officers decades later, long after Walter had become, without ever intending to, a kind of local legend nobody quite understood the shape of. Dorothy used to tease him gently about it. "You're the richest poor man I ever met," she'd say, and he'd laugh and tell her that money was just another kind of tide. It went out, and if you were patient, it always came back in, usually higher than before. They never had children of their own, but Dorothy's sister's boy, a restless kid named Samuel, used to spend summers with them, chasing gulls along the rocks and begging Walter to let him climb the tower steps. Walter taught him to read a barometer, to splice a line, to sit quietly and watch a storm build on the horizon without fear. On humid August evenings, the two of them would sit on the rocks below the tower with fishing rods they rarely bothered to cast, and Walter would tell him that the most important things in life almost never looked exciting while they were happening. A lighthouse looked the same on a calm Tuesday as it did the night it saved a fishing boat from the rocks. Nobody built a monument to an ordinary Tuesday, but the ordinary Tuesdays, stacked up one after another for 38 years, were the only reason the extraordinary nights ever mattered at all. Samuel didn't understand what his uncle meant back then. He simply liked the sound of Walter's voice against the waves and the smell of pipe tobacco and salt air, and he never once mentioned the metal box under the bed. Some things, Walter believed, a man kept to himself, not out of secrecy, but out of a kind of private dignity. The same dignity that let him climb those steps alone every night without complaint. Dorothy passed in the winter of 2003, after 31 years of marriage, and something in Walter went quiet in a different way after that. He kept climbing the steps. He kept buying his shares, $15 becoming $30, then $50, as small raises came his way over the decades. He never sold, not during the dot-com crash of 2000, not during the financial collapse of 2008, when half the town's retirement accounts were gutted and men twice his age were talking about working until they died. Walter watched his own balance fall by nearly half that year, felt the old familiar tightness in his chest, and did what he had always done. Nothing. He let the tide go out, and he trusted, the way he trusted the light itself, that it would come back in. Down at the diner, he heard men his own age talking about selling everything before it got worse, cashing out what little they had left. Walter never said a word to any of them. It was not his way to lecture. He simply climbed his 112 steps that evening, same as always, lit the lamp, same as always, and let the market do what markets have always eventually done for those patient enough to wait it out. By the time the Coast Guard automated the Solitude Point light in 2011, and Walter, at 64, climbed those iron steps for the very last time as a paid keeper, the town threw him a small retirement dinner at the Grange Hall. 40 people came. They gave him a carved wooden replica of the lighthouse and a card everyone had signed. Nobody in that room had the faintest idea what $15, invested patiently for 40 years and left alone to compound, quietly turns into. Walter lived another 14 years in the keeper's cottage, which the town let him stay in for a token rent, tending a small garden, mending nets for the younger fishermen, and still climbing the tower some evenings out of habit, just to watch the automated light do the job he used to do himself. He never told a soul about the metal box. Not the postman, not his oldest friend at the diner, not even Samuel, now a grown man with children of his own, who visited every August and still called him Uncle Walter. Walter Coyle died peacefully in his sleep on a quiet October night, in the same small bed where Dorothy had once teased him about being the richest poor man she'd ever met. He was 78 years old. It was Samuel who found the metal box while clearing out the cottage, tucked beneath the bed exactly where it had always been, next to the pocket watch and the photograph of Dorothy on the pier. Inside, beneath decades of quarterly statements bound in rubber bands gone brittle with age, was a single sheet of paper in Walter's careful handwriting, updated just 2 months before he died. Samuel sat down on the edge of the bed and read the number 3 times before he believed it. A lighthouse keeper who never earned more than $41,000 in a single year of his life had quietly built a fortune larger than most doctors and lawyers in the state would ever see, simply by buying a little piece of everything, every single payday, for 38 years, and refusing to sell when the tide went out. Attached to the statement was a letter, dated the same day. It explained everything: the insurance salesman at the diner, the $15 that grew into 50, the crashes he'd ridden out without flinching, the reason he'd never spent a dime of it on anything grander than a truck with more rust than paint. The money, he wrote, was never really about the money. It was about proving that an ordinary man, showing up quietly and faithfully night after night, could build something enormous in the dark, the same way a small flame at the top of a tower could be seen for 20 miles out at sea. He left it all to Samuel and Samuel's children, along with one final instruction written in the same steady hand that had logged 40 years of weather in the keeper's log. Don't tell anyone how you got it. Let them think you were lucky. The tide doesn't need an audience to keep coming in. Samuel kept the cottage. He kept the metal box too, empty now, sitting on his own bookshelf as a reminder. And some nights, when the fog rolls in thick as wool over Millbrook Harbor, he climbs the same 112 iron steps his uncle climbed for 38 years, and he stands at the top of the old tower, looking out at the automated light doing its quiet, faithful work, and he understands finally, not just a fortune, exactly what his uncle had been building up there in the dark all. A patience so deep it outlasted every storm that ever came to take it away. One quiet payday at a time, 112 steps at a time for 38 years, in the dark, with nobody watching at all, along.